Let me pray, and then we'll get started. Lord, thank you for this day and for this week. What an incredible week we have to celebrate, to remember, and to reconnect with you. I just pray that you would work today, you work in me, and speak to me and through me as we seek to understand what you have for us. In your holy name, amen. And I am sorry, I don't know what's going on here. It's kind of, hopefully I'll just stand still like this. That'll be comfortable. Almost as comfortable as talking about when we met you kids. Sorry about that. There's no more awkward way to say that, I don't think. I think we peak awkward right there. So check that off. Now we can move on. Okay, so this message is going to be a little bit different. It's going to start with the Latin lesson, right? Yay, that's why I came to church, Latin. Last week I said that we were going to talk about Michelle's favorite story, and I was wrong. We're going to talk about that in a couple weeks. So we're almost there. We're getting there. We're going to talk about a priori knowledge. This is from what is earlier, or to know before. We all have a priori knowledge, whether we know it or not, or care about Latin or not. This is something that is part of our lives. An a priori assumption is an assumption that is presumed to be true without any assessment of the facts or without further proof. For instance, so you've collected all this data, and so you assume that the next time you encounter something similar, you know exactly what's going to happen. You assume that. For instance, if your assumption is that I'm always hilarious, then you presume that today I will also be hilarious, right? Because I'm always hilarious, that was supposed to be funny, and then, therefore, today I will be hilarious. If last week was your first service at Bluffs, you might assume that today the sound won't work because it didn't work last week during worship, and so worship was a cappella. They always do a cappella worship at Bluffs. That's your a priori assumption. So based on prior experience, I assume what's going to come next. This is how we navigate our lives, right? This is how we make decisions. We deduce things and we make decisions based on those deductions. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's not a bad thing. That is a necessary part of life. But sometimes we become too rigid and unwilling to yield to new information. For instance, if you're looking for a new job, but the market is competitive and you've been rejected from several applications, that's a tough situation, right? It's tough. Maybe you're overqualified or very qualified. You just can't land the new job. That's a tough situation. So a priori knowledge tells you not to bother because you're going to be rejected the next time, right? So that is where it begins to fall apart. You need to keep going on. So there's a fallacy to a priori knowledge. The fallacy occurs when someone assumes a conclusion to be true before examining the evidence or resisting the new evidence. For instance, if you are accustomed to driving down, if you live kind of north La Crosse area on Alaska, West Salem, all that, and you're used to driving south on 16. 16 is always open, right? So you keep driving that way, and you keep running into these roadblocks because you can't learn that you have to plan differently, right, Deb? Right? It changes how you plan how to get to La Crosse or get to church or whatever. It always worked, and so it always will work. Likewise, you might, in the next couple of months, say, 16 is never open, so I should never bother taking 16, and you fail to recognize that it is now open. So it can backfire on us. A priori knowledge can backfire on us. For instance, if you've ever known someone with a chronic problem, an attitude or behavior that hurts you, they say they're going to change, but they don't. And then when they really are changing, you don't notice or trust that it's real. That can be a tough time in a relationship. You've said you're going to stop doing this time and time again, and finally when you do, I can't trust that. I can't live in that new knowledge. So why are we talking about this? Because I think there's at least two relevant assumptions that the disciples have as first century Jews that are relevant to this story that we're going to talk about this morning. This would be a priori knowledge they brought to their experience with Jesus. Remember, traveling rabbis, even Messiah figures were not new. Jesus isn't the first one to claim to be that. Right? They've been waiting for this. So this isn't a new thing, and they'd been tricked before. So he brings some assumptions to their experience with Jesus. And those things are relevant to this passage. At least two assumptions. Here's the two that I want to talk about today. One is God is distant. God is distant. That would have been an assumption. The temple had been destroyed and remade and destroyed and remade, and now they're occupied by outside forces. This had happened several times over. You had promised that we'd be this great nation, and now we're not. We're second-hand citizens, essentially refugees in our own country. That is true. God hasn't done anything clear or obvious or certain in 400 years. There's been no prophetic message, no way of knowing that God still cares or still is involved or invested in us. God is distant. Perhaps he's moved on from this land and from its people. He's chosen someone else or just forgotten the whole project altogether. That would have been an a priori assumption for most Jews. They're trying to figure out how to be Jews, which becomes more cultural than religious, more behavioral than spiritual, because God is distant. Another assumption that is relevant to the story is that chaos is real and has control over nature. Chaos is a real force. It isn't just things can get out of hand or a little messy or like these kids won't pick up their toys. It's not that, or my roommate's a slob. It's not that kind of thing. Chaos is this real force. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. I also talked about Leviathan, the chaos monster. We see this in the Old Testament, particularly in the poetic books like Job and Psalms. The waters rising up. And at the end of Job, he mentions actually Leviathan. There was this understanding of a mythical beast that lived in the seas. And it symbolized chaos as this force. It's one of the major points of the Genesis account, the creation account, is not how many days it took or the science behind it. It's not that. Is that there was chaos and God created order. God created order. There is one God, and that God created order. That's a mind-blowing thought to someone from the ancient Near East. Chaos is real. Chaos is this force. In Job, we see that God has a very different view of chaos. He's not afraid of that. It looks kind of like this. If we can show that next picture. Nope, sorry. Next one. Next one. The picture of the dog. There we go. It looks like that. Yeah, it looks like this. So God says to Job, can you put Leviathan on a leash and give it to your girls to play with? I think it looks like this massive dog and this little girl just working it. Yeah, this is chaos. Ain't nothing but a thing, nothing to worry about. God's in control. Gave this monster for a plaything. Peace and order to disorder. So God is distant and chaos is real. Those would be two assumptions that are relevant. This portion of Matthew's gospel begins in Capernaum. So in Matthew 8:18 it says this, now when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. Now we can show the map. You can see the brown spot. That's at Capernaum. That's where Jesus is, and he's going to cross the Sea of Galilee. We're going to talk about that in a couple weeks. So Jesus has given the Sermon on the Mount. There's all these amazing healing stories, and now Jesus wants to kind of get out of Dodge, go across the sea somewhere else. And that gets us to Matthew 8:23 and 27. And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. But he, Jesus, was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, save us, Lord, we are perishing. And he said to them, why are you afraid, O you of little faith? Then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, what sort of man is this, that even winds and sea obey him? I think this is one of those great stories. And I say that most weeks, especially when I'm talking from the Gospels, because they're all great stories, and so that's always tough. But this is one of those great stories that is also gets twisted and abused. People are told that they don't have enough faith or they're not a good enough Christian based on this story. When people twist Jesus' message to abuse and control or shame people, it really bothers me. We have this beautiful story. When I say story, isn't to say it's fiction. These are stories because story is the best way to communicate truth. You go back throughout history. What's the best way to communicate things? It's story, it's narrative. The Bible is 60% narrative. Why? Because we remember things better that way. We learn better that way. We relate to it. People have used this story to condemn each other and themselves for their lack of faith. I think that's wrong. That's not the point. First, there's nothing wrong with being scared during a storm. Okay? Fear is this internal warning system. If you're driving in the winter and you notice the tires start slipping and you feel scared that you might lose control of the vehicle, then you should slow down, right? That's just wisdom, responding to this sense of fear. Like, oh, things are a little bit out of control. I need to slow down to be safe. That's fear working its purpose. If you can't leave your home because something bad could happen, then fear is taking over. Fear is not working its purpose. Fear is winning out instead of helping you. I don't think Jesus is mad at his disciples for reacting to the storm. Some of them were fishermen. They knew these waters. They knew what a storm could do to a boat. They knew the risks and the harm that could come. I don't think he's shaming them for that. I think what's happened is they forgot what Jesus had just said and done. Remember, the story is he's healing people. He's preaching this amazing message. He's healing people, then they get in a boat. So it's pretty quick. Sometimes the timeline in the Bible, the Gospels, is a little bit hard to figure out. Was it next day? Because it's 3 years condensed into 20 chapters or so. So was this the next day or next week or months later? We don't always know that. This is pretty clear. These things just happened, and they get in the boat. He speaks with some kind of authority they've never encountered before. He's something they had not seen. He healed the sick and the demon-possessed. He called himself the Son of Man, which for us is a little bit hard to get our head around. For them, it would have been like, what? That's a big deal. You don't just say that, Son of Man. And that grew in meaning to include his redemptive work on earth and the cross. Looking back, they understood what Son of Man meant even more than they did in the moment. Jesus comes from humankind to save and heal humankind. Jesus is Emmanuel, which means he's God with us, like God literally walking among us, living this kind of life. And he's given undeniable evidence that God loves humans, and he's restoring shalom. I can't think of anything more shalomy than God coming and healing someone who's in distress. Yes, if you don't know what to do, what word to say, just add a Y to the end of it and you'll be fine. God touching earth, touching humans, sick humans, possessed humans, icky humans. Remember last week we talked about him touching and healing a leper. You don't do that. Jesus does that. This is a radically different, amazingly, incredibly different, unfathomably different person comes and does this. This is God touching earth. This is what God is like. He says, if you want to know the Father, know me. If you want to know what God's like, he's like this. And what am I doing? I'm doing these kinds of things with these kinds of people. This is what they've just witnessed. God was there with them. They saw all this. They heard all this. Had they already forgotten? I think what happened was they got into the boat and Jesus fell asleep, which is awesome, right? He's tired. He's man too. He's human too. And the chaos monster's back. We had a couple of great days, but now we're back to reality. Right? Some of us have experienced that. We go to a spiritual retreat, we go to camp or something, and we're like flying high, we feel close to our friends, we feel close to God, and we come back, and now, or we gone on a missions trip, or whatever it might be, we come back, and now we're back to reality. We don't feel so close anymore, and so maybe that wasn't real, maybe that wasn't true, maybe God wasn't really speaking to me. These old assumptions creep back in. And we start believing things like it's the hope that kills you, right? Like, why bother trying? Perhaps Jesus is not so different after all. The Buddhists call this the monkey mind, which I love. It's when our minds are restless and distracted, full of excessive thoughts and lack of control. It's the monkey mind. It's also not very shalomy, right? Jesus comes to bring peace, to bring order, and sometimes that's the last thing that we believe or feel. He says, "Oh, you of little faith." I think that could easily be, "Oh, you of little trust," or "You of little memory," or "How could you forget what just happened?" or "Dudes, really?" I'm here now, and I'm not afraid of the chaos monster, and neither should you be afraid of the chaos monster. It isn't that chaos isn't going to rear its head and cause trouble. Chaos will. But Jesus is here now. He's changed things. His rebuke of the storm is interesting. Both Mark and Luke record him telling the storm to be still. To be still. This is the Greek word, so don't look this up and shout any corrections, please. The Greek word phimoo. So Latin and Greek. How smart am I, right? How smart are we? He says phimoo to the storm. Phimoo means to muzzle something. It's less like calm down and more like shut up. It's as if Jesus sees a storm as a personality or demonic and he's silencing it. You're done talking now. I'm here. There's a new sheriff in town. It's going to take some time to set some things straight. I've got more work to do, but you're not the boss. I am. Shut up. Think of that. Sometimes in our lives, it feels like things are so out of control, and I think it's very easy to think of evil. And then the disciples, marveling at what they had seen, said this, "What sort of man is this? Who does this? What?" We're going to be talking about that on Good Friday and on Easter. He's that sort of man. He's the sort of man who touches the leper. He's the sort of man who heals the sick. He's the sort of man who does all this because he first loved us. You don't have to work for it. It's already been offered for free. It's this weird upside-down economy. I'm going to give you all this so I can give you more, and I just want you to be my friend and come along for the ride. There are other true things for sure, but those things are true. And if we can learn anything from this story, and as we head into Easter, Jesus came to us to heal us and to save us, and then to bring us into his kingdom work. You don't have to work for it. You don't have to work for it. You can't. It's a free gift. And that is just true. So as we sing this song, let's remember and let's worship him.